So being in Texas, we're really looking at a housing stock that's 1880s, 1890s into the 1950s, historic housing stock. Spending time with Jackson now at North Bennett Street on the podcast, going up there to visit, being on the board of the North Bennett Street School, I'm reinvigorated and reminded how these houses were made, and it's so fun to go back and look at these historic houses. All the parts and pieces are handmade, and that's really refreshing. So I'm in Boston. I'm at the school to see Jackson. I'm on the board there. We're doing a president search. And so preservation program's a 2-year program at North Bennett Street. First year, which Jackson just completed, was Steve O'Shaughnessy, who also went through the program. He's a master craftsman, master builder. The second year program is a guy named Michael Burry. Michael Burry is almost world renowned as far as his expertise. He actually worked at Notre Dame when they did the restoration. He was actually working on some of those parts and pieces. And so he's that kind of caliber of guy. So he tells me about this house in Hanover that was going to be pushed down. The developer bought the land. This old house was there, and they were looking to restore it. And he starts telling me about it, 1724 plank framing. I'm not really sure what plank framing is. And so I'm interested, and I can't wait to see this thing because it sounds special. Okay guys, we're in New England, Hanover, Mass. We're just south of Boston. It's an historic town. Maybe not as famous as Plymouth or Salem, but it certainly has the same roots and the same history that's going on here. Behind me is the classic New England church. Across is an old city hall. There is just rich history here. So in my world, 1720 in New England is early. As I've worked on my new book for historic millwork, I really start about 1740 as kind of the start of the Georgian period in America into about 1780. And really the earlier houses than that, you get into this colonial, very early, first settlement type of building. And so this house is early Georgian. You know, I consider like 1760, America was smoking. It was growing. There was a lot of industry. There was a lot of stuff going on. Great houses were being built in Philadelphia and other cities like that. So 1720 is early. So what exactly am I expecting to see? Obviously, handmade things, right? Handmade nails, wood-riven parts and pieces. What will the windows be like? I mean, that will be an interesting thing. I'm assuming it's a timber frame. All these parts and pieces and how it's coming together should be really interesting. One of the things that brought me here, one of the things that encouraged me about this is that great historic houses like this one are being torn down, okay? They're being bulldozed over and then pushed over because there is a lack of understanding of what that rich history is. There's a lack of understanding of the timber framing, of the lime plaster, of the woodwork, of the windows, of the construction, that we're losing these things. And so I want to celebrate this historic house. I want to celebrate these building traditions because they matter, but this is a good opportunity for us to remember how to build. The lost art of building is not lost. We need to continue to restore houses and do things like this because they matter. So North Bennett Street, right, practices a lot of these lost arts. They have violin making. You know, Harvard and Yale went to North Bennett Street, said start a bookbinding program because we're having to send all our books back to Europe. There's piano technology. There's fine furniture making. I mean, they're probably best known for their traditional furniture making. The idea being, if you can build the old stuff, you can build anything. So the preservation program is part of that. Started in '86 by my instructor. I was there '91 to '93, and really learning, you know, to take old hand tools. Reason why I've gotten all my hand tools here, because North Bennett Street's all about that. Okay guys, we're on Union Street in Hanover, Mass. with Michael Burry, second-year teacher in the Preservation Carpentry program at North Bennett Street. You're restoring, fixing, building houses. Give us some of the history on how this house ended up here and kind of what you guys are doing.
Well, some of the history, I've had my own business before I came to North Bennett Street as an instructor. I've been doing preservation since I was a kid at age 13. So, so it's felt best to, we could just bring the students into some of my projects.
It becomes more real when it's a real project as opposed to trying to create a project for 12 or 14 students. The other thing that happens with a house this old is how much has it changed? I mean, right, it's 1720, it's 300 years old. The fact that a developer wanted to push it down means it isn't that special, or at least they can't recognize it, probably more likely. And so really, what are we dealing with? Is this thing completely stripped? We looked at that house in Lexington. That was a Minuteman had built that house right in 1774. And there really wasn't much Minuteman left in that, right? It was the Greek revival piece and how much original fabric was really there. So I'm kind of curious, 300 years old, been redone, about to be pushed down. This could be a wreck, but it could be pretty interesting too. So this house was not here. It was somewhere else.
Somewhere else. So it was about a mile from this location on Main Street in Hanover. So we got word that they was going to get demolished. Someone bought the property. They didn't want the house. There's a demolition delay bylaw in this town for a 1-year demolition delay. So we came in, looked at it, decided we can bring students in and turn it into a student project. So we documented the whole thing before we started, and we documented every step along the way. We numbered all the pieces.
Wait, you dismantled it?
We dismantled it.
So was it not possible to move it? So when Michael said we moved it, I have the picture in my mind of the house up on wheels and them going down a city street and moving things around, but they didn't do that. They disassembled it. Now, when I was at North Bennett Street, we disassembled a barn. You actually document all of the different pieces, you draw it all out, and then you mark every single piece of wood. That was a barn that we did. This is a house.
The best way to save it is move it intact, because we've got building movers in the area. We brought in a building mover and we worked out a whole scenario. Downside of that was we were on Main Street, school buses, traffic. We also had a 110,000 volt power line we had to go underneath.
You dismantle the house, okay? Yeah. Which, how long does that take? How long does dismantling take?
Well, we had graduates of the program, and also it was 10 students that year.
Okay.
So that was about a 2-month dismantling.
You learn a lot more when you disassemble something. You learn, kind of how it's put together, the things that last, the things that work. So to think that this was a lot of student work going into this, disassembling this house, I'm excited because they learned a lot, but I'm also amazed at what they were able to accomplish. So it's a 1720s house?
So we did dendrochronology dating, and that's a method of dating a timber by looking at the chronology of the growth range.
Sure.
So 1724 to 1725 for the build date.
What I'm struck by watching Michael work and put this house back together and do these hand-riven methods, splitting logs and doing things, we're really looking at a master who understands the art, who can do the art. His depth of knowledge is unbelievable. So probably there's a guy just Michael's same age teaching and training apprentices and journeymen how to do that, how to put that together 300 years ago. So it really is like stepping back in time. So we've got a pretty cool building, 1724. The framing is pretty unique because you've got a timber frame, outer frame, but then the walls are all planks, right? It has a name, right?
So it's a plank frame construction.
Plank frame.
So this is a type of construction that probably came from the Pilgrims in 1620 when they landed on the shores, because there's a huge need for housing. And the more quickly you can build that house, the more simply, the better.
So this is a quick build, a modular building. Essentially, you're an outer frame, but then you're taking, 1 or 2 inch planks and nailing them to that frame?
So you have the timber frame, you got posts in the corners, and you got girts for the second floor, plates and tie beams for the basic frame. But then there's the vertical planks, which are various widths depending on the size of the tree. 1.25 in this case. Sometimes I found thicker and some thinner. But that becomes part of the structure. But
sawmills aren't uncommon in America, and so they're sawing planks and then nailing or pegging the planks to the wall. So apparently the plank framing, and this reminds us of where America was in 1720, there was a lack of skilled labor. You didn't have a ton of carpenters who were masters at timber framing. You might have had some guys who had a little bit of knowledge, but how do I, as a builder in the 1720s, get a house built? Well, if I don't have the skilled labor, I've got to come up with other methods, other ways of doing it. And one way they did that in America was with plank framing. And plank framing was basically taking a 2x material and nailing it to your overall frame. If a timber frame is made up and you have all these different, parts and pieces, this is a skeletal timber frame, right? Without the infilling of the studs and stuff that go in between. And you're really just sheathing the outside of the house, outside of this basic skeletal frame, with these planks of boards. My first question, when I realized how they had plank framed and what that meant and how that looked, I was like, well, what did they do with windows? I mean, you've got penetrations in the outside of the wall. My mind goes to the build science videos we do and the penetrations in the walls and things like that. They're very important. Well, they would cut a hole in the wall and they'd actually nail the window to the wall, flash the top of it. Crazy to think that they just nailed the window to the wall and then put the clapboards and everything over top of that. Practical, interesting. I hope we can find an example of that because it'd be fun to check that out and see how they did that.
So in 1836, probably changed hands. That's frequently when updates happen. The house probably faced south in the 1725 portion of it. They changed that position. They moved the house to be perpendicular to the lot line or the street line, and then added, for the new frontage was 1836.
And then now you have got, so you'll have this colonial, early 1720s, an 1830s piece, and then you've kind of told the story that there's this Victorian addition where the garage is and stuff.
Let me back up a little bit. With that 1836 time period, they gutted that 1725, used those parts in the rest of the building. And so everything was 1836. So what we're trying to clack back a little bit and saying there's a 1725 portion which will restore to that time period. 1836 will remain 1836. And let's say that, you know, in 1870s for Carpenter Gothic, they built a new addition.
So I'm finally kind of getting my head around the whole project, right? We've got this 1720s house, a Greek Revival addition in the 1830s, and then the way they tacked on the new parts, the garage, the practical things that you need for a new home today, because this is a spec build, basically. They did that in a Victorian method, right? So they've got a narrative, the story that I always talk about, this house that makes sense, that they didn't do it all in the Colonial Revival. They kept this story going through, that this house grew up over time. I think that's a special way of building. And we're coming out of the stage where you're halfway, maybe a little over halfway.
Yeah, we might have another year to go.
Another year to go. And so we're going to be tracking along this project, tracking along how we're doing it. We've got a bunch of exciting things because we're not only going to be looking to the past, we're going to be using the past to help inspire us to build better. There's build science here, guys. There's build science ideas of making this house comfortable, making it energy efficient, as well as having this historic fabric. So we got about a year left, right? There's a lot of work to do. Basically, it's almost dried in at this point. And so we'll be closing it up. We'll be putting a roof on it. We'll be plastering the walls, trim, millwork, stairs, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of cool things. It'll be fun to follow along. Let me know what you guys think. This is a fun project. I'm Brent Hull. Thanks for watching.